Okay, well, I'm going to have to add our thumbnail at the beginning. I can do that post facto. Sometimes I have that all here so I can share screen. I won't do that. All right, PJ Manney, we are so honored and thrilled to have her. This is our first actual contact with someone, it's like ET, first contact with someone from Hollywood, Planet Hollywood, who actually knows the ropes, knows that the arcane culture, which in itself is science fictional. And I'm just so looking forward to this because I know we're going to go into paths we've never gone before. So PJ has many credits. How do you pronounce it? Gina? Sheena? Is it
Xena.
Xena? Okay, Xena, and a number of other TV series. She has done various other um, types of publishing and working in Hollywood roles. So I will let you, unroll that as you will. It's sort of like when Ray Bradbury would start, he would just unroll his thing as part of his speech. Okay, so take it on, PJ.
Okay, hi, I'm PJ. Um, yes, it's true. I started in Hollywood. I started in what's called story development. I was an executive in charge of finding writers, finding ideas, finding directors and actors, putting together the entire package and selling it to studios. In a large part of that would be I could find an article in a newspaper and say, "Oh, who's the writer who should write this?" and then work with the writer and develop the story. And I was telling a lot of writers how to write. And then one day, my husband came to me and said, "We're going to, well, I'm going, meaning him. He's going to New Zealand to film originally what were just four Hercules, The Legendary Journeys telemovies. And he would be away for 6 to 9 months. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go. I'm going to take a pause in my career and I'm going to go. That turned into a whole nother life. We were there for 7 years. Those telemovies became, a full series, then Xena Warrior Princess, then a whole bunch of other shows. I wrote in Hercules and Xena. I never knew I could write. I'm dyslexic, dyscalculic, dysgraphic, and I'd been told my entire life, you can't write. Like you can do anything else you want in the world. You can't write. Turned out that wasn't right. So after that, sold a whole bunch of pilots to various networks and companies in Hollywood, and then decided I'd had enough of television. It was, TV breaks your heart at a certain point. And I decided to take one of those ideas and turn it into a novel. And that was Revolution, which was nominated for a Philip K. Dick Award. Um, that turned into a trilogy. I know it's really tiny, probably on your screens, but of also identity and conscience. And it was in this process of writing these novels. And I mean, oh, by the way, in terms of science fiction, I come from a mad science fiction fan. He was part of the original Hugo Gernsback group in New York. He went to all the cons. He collected, he had actually still has one of the great pulp collections in America. And it's now my job to sell it because he's in hospice and I need to raise money for him. Had an extraordinary collection of original science fiction, first editions signed, dedicated, you name manuscripts, you name it, he was that guy. So I was fed this continually. I was fed Heinlein and Asimov and Silverberg and all of these greats and all the pulp writers. And so when I came to writing science fiction, I came to it out of not just Hollywood, but also I was also an American Studies major. So that whole background came to bear of history and also most importantly for what I'm going to talk about today, the interdisciplinary synthesis of how we create as a culture. And that's very much about what my books are also about, even though they are hard science fiction. They deal specifically with the growth of technologies like brain-computer interfaces, robotics, artificial intelligence, virtual realities, all of these things that are, when I was writing them originally, where people were like, "What? That'll never happen." And now you read Revolution and go, "Wait, it's happening." And then I take you by the hand as a more mainstream reader. And I'm introducing, in essence, mainstream readers to these ideas. And then I take you to more radical technologies and how they affect us as humans. So that is a lead up to my talk, which is back in 2018, I was at Norwestcon and I was put on a panel called Science Fiction in the Age of President Trump. And the idea was, as the entire culture and politics and polarities are occurring within our culture, how do we see speculative fiction changing? And it was a Gordon Van Gelder, me, Nisi Shaw, and Elsa. Now it's Elsa Jones. Back then it was Sun Jin-sun. And it was an extraordinary panel. And I actually had an out-of-body experience on it, which is normal for me. when all of the stuff starts roiling, my gut's going, the brain's firing like mad, and I just start talking, and stuff was coming out I had absolutely, I had no control over. And we started talking about how the stories that we were telling today were not serving us. We were telling stories for young people that were dystopias, but were also not telling us what to do at the end of the dystopia, if we could even escape the dystopia. There was no roadmap to a future. And that has been an issue that Neil Stephenson's been talking about for the last decade. It's part of what the Arizona State University Center for Science and the Imagination has been working on for a number of years. But they haven't gotten a lot of traction. And I've actually talked with them about this. So they're very much behind the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today. So having said that, I'm going to give you a talk that is extremely truncated because I know I don't have that much time, but I very much want to do a lightly over and then some deep dives so you can see in little silos of information where this is coming from. So as I said, I write hard science fiction about near-term future technologies and how it will impact society as we know it and where society will go. Pardon 1 second, I just go away, little thing there. Okay, there we go. So we're in the midst of one of the few monumental paradigm shifts for humanity because of science and technology. In one sense, our shift is unprecedented because of the specifics of the kind of technology we have, and in another, it's loaded with precedents. And we know this through both history and storytelling. And I'm here to explain why we're going through a time right now of building a new mythos. So what's a new mythos? Stories tell us who we are, point out change and conflict, and guide us how to behave because of the inherent ethics the stories contain. So when technology drives cultural change, how can we tell better stories to improve as people, as cultures, and as a species? Sometimes the technological changes are smaller, like a shift from horses to automobiles. Sometimes they're massive, like the shift we're in right now from a pre to a post-internet world. But guess what? We've made shifts like this before. In what's called the axial age, as originally defined by German historian Karl Jaspers in the mid-20th century, he believed the axial age ran from 800 to 200 BCE, but recent historians now expand this date out to the entire first millennia BCE and potentially beyond. This period came out of an intense technological change, agriculturally, militarily, in communications like writing, and in the constructions of cities, bureaucracies, and social contracts. Also, it was a period of intense violence, since so many ways of living and belief systems were being overhauled. Because of writing, this was the time of the codification, the actual writing down of Judaism and Hinduism, and the creation of Buddhism, Greco-Roman philosophies, Taoism, Confucianism, and now what we recently realize, many other cultures, especially in the Americas, who were starting to conceive and codify their ideas. These systems evolved because for the first time in human history, we're living in tight quarters with many people we didn't know, well beyond Dunbar's number, and animism was no longer cutting it. We needed to establish rules, ethics, and morals so we didn't kill each other. These were transmitted in stories and cultural founding documents like the Torah, the Vedas, transcriptions of Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, the Tao. They had in common their own versions of what I call the metal rules: gold, silver, platinum. There are many ways of basically saying how I would like or not like to be treated should reflect how I treat or don't treat you. The next massive shift in the West of cultural paradigms was what we call in the West the Enlightenment. While the printing press 2 centuries before kicked off the ability to shift culture dramatically, it was this period of industrial, scientific, religious, cultural, and political revolutions. Because there are always, by the way, because politics, there are always periods of intense violence about founding principles. Always. These were not just wars about land or dominion. These were wars about religion, meaning values, types of economics, human rights, and what the new tech and culture had to say about it. The new stories reflected these, emphasizing the individual and their rights, empirical thought, the overthrow of the old and the replacement of the new. There were so many aspects of our world that changed in all of these revolutions. But old myths don't go away. They're transmuted. We could spend 2 hours just talking about older myths, why we still use them, why they may not work. Myths we carry forward from the first millennia BCE and earlier about gender, class, power structures, economic systems. Myths we created in the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, which leaned into dichotomies and polarities and absolutes, like there's a spiritual realm and a scientific realm, and never the twain shall meet. Or the Enlightenment economic model of capitalism as the only way economies can work, because they were based on the technological change all around them, like factories and currency-based global trade. Old myths are seductive. They're shortcuts to understanding, but in our new period, some of us realize they lack the complexity needed to actually understand where we're going. They're an easier, but pardon my bad grammar, wronger choice. And mostly, they just don't help us in this new time. So what's our new time? The first most important technology we created that pushed our new mythos into being was mass communications. The second most important technology is artificial intelligence. And AI is the reason why it's taken me so long to grapple with this talk and book and getting this out in a complete sense, because I needed to really wrestle with where I knew AI could potentially go, but I wanted to get the sense of where the myths are now going. We're in a period of reevaluating what it means to be human. Human versus machine, humans confronting our limitations. We've erased the relationship of time and space through our internet technologies that we've had since pre-humanity. We've expanded the notion of communication beyond writing or speaking. The entire global communication system, culminating now in the internet, brain-computer interfaces, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, robotics. Yeah, I write about this stuff. And we can see the incremental changes that led here. But we're now at a tipping point where many rules we had no longer apply. It's not just internet etiquette, it's ethics. And that's where story comes in. We should feel free to tell stories that do relate to who we are now, why we think we're here, and where we think we're going, and inspire hope instead of fear at the same time. Change is scary, but who knows? If we can provide positive stories, they may become the myths of our future. So how do you build a new mythos? There are lots of parts of storytelling, like structure, character, location or mise-en-scène, plot, tone, point of view, dialogue, beginnings, middles, ends. And because this group predominantly are not professional writers, you may all write, but I'm addressing this to people who are readers and fans of science fiction. I'm not going to go into all of the technical writing parts of how you build a new mythos, because I could do a whole nother talk just on that. So instead, I'm just going to go really over quickly some ideas like story structure. How does it change? There's so many things we could discuss, but again, don't have time, like Western 3-act structure versus Asian 4-act Kisho Tenketsu structure, or African Fabulism Nagano structure, and many other cultural structures that tell beautiful stories that we don't realize within the West have relevance. Or classic superhero stories that are no longer useful because they only promote the status quo. Or how endings have changed in storytelling. So I teach a course at the Rambo Academy, if you're interested, and or eventually will read this book when it's done. But suffice it to say, we structure stories in this period of the new mythos by incorporating change in structure, not just change in what we think the story is about. I could also talk about characters and protagonists, which gets into the hero's journey versus the heroine's journey, which is not about male versus female stories, but about stories of individuals returning a world to the status quo versus a group evolving and problem solving through the change, which are two very different kinds of structures. I also want to talk about how even the superhero story is evolving, if we talked about that, where Batman no longer helps us figure out our social issues, but Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is a great new mythos movie, does. So instead, I'm going to drill down with where I think this group might relate to more, and that's the concepts of time and space. So let's start with time, although it of course will intersect with space because, as we all know, they're related. Here's a quote to start us off. A story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. Now, that's a quote from Jean-Luc Godard, who was a French filmmaker of the New Wave in the 1960s, but it could have easily have come from Ursula Le Guin or Kurt Vonnegut, or every time travel or multiverse story, culminating in the most recent film, Everything Everywhere All at Once. So science fiction writers, when we're all sitting together, a lot of us do co-writing, which motivates us to get words on paper, and we check in with each other. We all joke because co-writing takes place within a certain time frame, that time is a construct, it's illusion, it's fake, we're in flow, we lose track of time when we write. But what if the nature of time is such that chronological events are an old mythos? That we live in the pretense of linear chronology and causality, and the reasons we believe what we believe is this false understanding of time. Horror, especially ghost stories, deal with this directly. So do stories like The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, or its movie Arrival, which reveals a truth of the universe that we have not accepted until aliens teach us that time is nonlinear. And if we experience it as they do, we'll find the profundity, rectify our mistakes, and find hope in what might seem hopeless. Or Sarah Gailey's story Stet, about automated vehicles. The story reverses the sense of time by freezing it. We have to create the story of an academic writer's past in our minds through the brief conversations left in the margins of an editor's draft. If you haven't read this short story, it's devastating. There's no real past, present, or future. Sarah, I'm sorry, Gloria. I can't hear you, Gloria. You're muted.
What was the title again, please?
STET, S-T-E-T, which is an editor's term that a writer uses. When an editor says you should change this, they write STET, which means you're not allowed to change it. Keep it as it is. Mm-hmm. So in STET, there's no real past, present, or future in this journal article that you're reading, along with all the editorial comments, except as academic examples. But we create the past and its consequences from the protagonist's insistence she will not allow the new edits that neuter her point of view. So as long as her edits exist, so does the past, in hopes of making a better future. Groups of protagonists can make structural systemic change in time. Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future is about the ministry of people trying to fix the world from climate catastrophe by advocating for future people as much as they would for those in the present. Everything Everywhere All at Once erases time and space to the extent that an individual contains multitudes of different ages, occupations, skills, occupying different multiverses, and all these characters can come to bear on the here and now in a single powerful story about love and family. Space. Now, I'm going to interpret space for now as in how we create the concept of locations where stories occur. And we're going to look at locations in the macro because there's no specific order of story elements of character structure, plot tone, in which one conceives a story. However, all conditions of your story depend on how you create the place it occurs. And in this particular case, when you're talking about science fiction, well, speculative fiction, is it a utopia, dystopia, or the third topia, which most people don't think about, heterotopia? These are the topias that inform our opinion and ethics about a place. We think we're familiar with them because we assume they fall into just dystopia and utopia, a dichotomy, as opposed to the three I just mentioned. So do a quick lightning round on what they mean. Utopia comes from Thomas More's 1517 novel of the same name, and it literally means no place. When we write about utopias, they're places of perfection, a goal to be reached, somewhere to be thrown out of, like Eden, somewhere that doesn't exist since humans create their places and we're not perfect. It's hard to write about utopias because in theory there's no conflict, which I would address in another lecture where we talk about Western story structure, which is obsessed with conflict. Either we write about trying to approach utopia, like solarpunk, or we write about how we've lost utopia, either through realizations that they weren't utopias, but dystopias, like Brave New World or the Omelas stories, or its destruction, like Logan's Run. Dystopia, or the bad place, are places that have turned out poorly through hubris or corruption, through fault or by accident. It could be the cautionary tale. If we don't choose well, we will turn into this. Dystopias are especially popular after Huxley's Brave New World, Orwell's 1984, Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, because they were all very good at presenting it. Science fiction is filled with dystopias ever since. Most of the most successful franchises in speculative publishing history are dystopias that are either halted, righted, or never overcome. Thanks, Hunger Games. It's usually the criticisms of contemporary social or political trends, and much of our speculative fiction is filled with it. Divergent, Children of Men, The Expanse. I supposedly wrote 3 of them, but my last book flips the script and takes us back to a heterotopia, hoping for a utopia. Because I had my epiphany at NorwestCon before I wrote my 3rd book. But that doesn't mean that cautionary tales are heated. They're often inspiration for bad actors in the real world. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and The Expanse led to the real-life trope of billionaires in space looking to copy The Expanse and its economic and colonial problems for real. My own books inspired a certain someone to build the very things I warned about, minus the ethics I begged for. So for me, this is actually quite personal. Maybe dystopias don't work anymore. Western thought is still mired in the dichotomy and the dialectic, the polarity. Good versus evil, mind versus body, political left and the right, spirituality versus secularism, capitalism versus a bunch of isms most users don't even understand. We're all about the simple answer. But the reliance on these dialectical dystopias as a storytelling format is, in my opinion, dangerous. Because it makes us think that 1, there are only 2 choices, life with or without the bad guys. Or 2, as Neil Stephenson said, they stifle innovation by making everyone afraid of progress without presenting a better answer to the issue. Or 3, they're easier for the audience to consume during historical periods we deem as successful because there's an inverse relationship to entertainment choices. Anyone from Hollywood knows how this works. In good times, we enjoy depressing stories. They're deep and they're not threatening. In bad times, we want fun, escapist, constructive, and hopeful stories. But hopeful stories can be our roadmaps in a period of change to our own success and joy. Also, dystopias train readers to think of situations as winner takes all, zero sum. But then what? We destroy the Death Star, but given all the damage to people, places, institutions, what comes next? There's a third topia few talk about unless you're in grad school, but some of our greatest new mythos stories utilize this space. Heterotopia, as coined by Michel Foucault. If utopia is no place and dystopia is the bad place, heterotopia is the different place. This is a big subject all on its own. I'm going to cut and paste the speech that Foucault gave in 1968, which I highly recommend everyone take a look at. Why do I bring up heterotopias? I think they lie at the heart of the present and future myth-making. Like the previous topias, they are a place, but also a symbol and a metaphor. And they're a writer's framework tool to imagine new stories. Heterotopias are the place that lie on the outskirts, or are surrounded by walls, and the walls give the place a new meaning. Or they're not what they seem, or places that change meaning depending who's in them and over the passage of time, or are transitions from one state of being to another. Attempting to create a utopia is itself a heterotopia because citizens are usually isolated and separate, determined to change their circumstances for the better. And change, which is crucial within the concept of heterotopias, is something we can all relate to in our period, which marks the time to make new myths that reflect change. Vehicles and ships are heterotopias. Ocean vessels, spaceships, Moby Dick, Alien, You Sexy Thing. Even though the river Styx is an ancient myth, the boat going up the river in Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now toggles between heterotopia and dystopia. Created worlds are heterotopias. Middle Earth, Animal Farm. Places where people are sent away are heterotopias, like hospitals or mental institutions or prisons. Graveyards, gardens, festivals, and fairgrounds, as in Bradbury. Museums and libraries, maybe the ultimate heterotopic space is Borges' Library of Babel, which creates the universe as a flawed library. Private schools, as in Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. Miniaturized places where we recreate on a smaller scale all the issues in the outside world. And liminal spaces, the places we treat differently because they're empty, or places we pass through, like cemeteries or haunted houses, purgatory, empty or abandoned schools and institutions that are naturally unnatural in their emptiness. What we see in almost every heterotopic scenario is reliance on change as the driver of the story. These are not quite hero's journeys. There's no returning to a status quo, but processing deep and meaningful change, even if it's just about accepting and adapting to whatever the new situation or realization is. So I'm going to go off grid into a techno-philosophical talk about spaces and locations, so please stay with me. I'm going to start with the concept of the noosphere, which some of you may already be familiar with. One of the concepts in the last century that differs from all other times is our dawning understanding that we are in the context of our planet and what's going on everywhere. In the before time, we couldn't grasp the world. Now, the systems we exist inside are becoming apparent. Old myths with simple concepts of cause and effect, like a chariot carries the sun across the sky, or we need a strong leader to solve our problems, don't reflect what we see every day as reality. In the early 20th century, a Jesuit priest turned paleontologist, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, worked with two other scientists, geologist Vladimir Verdansky and mathematician Edouard Leroy, to come up with the concept of the noosphere. When the Earth was formed in cosmological time, there was a geosphere. Then a biosphere grew around it, with life evolving. Then the human species invented tools, culminating with a global communications network we know today. New means N-O-O, means mind, and the noosphere is the global mind, another layer around the Earth we've created through communications technologies, storytelling, radio, film and television, and finally the internet, which Teilhard de Chardin described almost a century ago. It explains the stage of evolutionary development we and our planet are in right now. I think of the noosphere as a sphere of thought enveloping the Earth. We created this. It's a thing. It's a tool, but it could also be a symbol and a metaphor. At its heart, it represents connection and communication on a global scale. Literally the water we swim in right now. For the last century of emerging global communications technologies, we've seen stories about hive minds and collective consciousnesses, which grapple with the myth of the individual versus a proto-noosphere. But now that the noosphere is actually all around us, and we're seeing both the good and bad sides of what it means for us, we're telling new stories about it. Pardon me, allergies. A lot of science fiction deals with the noosphere, whether authors call it that or not. It's popular among technologists and scientists to imagine the impact of evolution and information and communication technologies on our species. Teilhard de Chardin has become a hero for many in that space. I know he's one of mine, and it's at the heart of the new mythos. Here's another concept, which interestingly is related. I'm putting this concept under location because it's so big, you might as well think of it as both a place and time and change and everything. You'll see. Hyperobjects are a concept from the philosopher Timothy Morton that have been picked up in many places, including science fiction and fantasy writing. I'm quoting Morton here. I invented a word to describe all kinds of things that you can study and think about and compute, but that are not so easy to see directly. Examples that they use are things like the number of styrofoam cups. You could see any number of styrofoam cups and you can understand their effect on you in your space. But can you imagine all the styrofoam on Earth ever produced? Do you have a sense of that? Can you count it? How about all the plutonium created, or climate change, or pandemics? The examples don't have to be depressing. It could be, think of the Rocky Mountains in its geo, bio, and noosphere all together. Or how about just the entire noosphere? Or what encompasses our solar system or the universe? Things that are so big and complex we can't see their totality, but when they strike at us, like a climate change storm, they seem to come out of nowhere, even though we've been swimming in the eventuality all along. The usual human reaction to experiencing a hyperobject is to push it away in confusion or run away in terror. In fact, Morton often uses horror genre imagery to describe the phenomenon. I'm going to put a good article for y'all to start with right here. So author Jeff Vandermeer works consciously in hyperobjects. Mord, the flying bear, antagonist in Born, is one. So is the alien phenomena in his Southern Reach series. Vandermeer believes hyperobjects have become central to storytelling in the modern era. Filmmaker Adam McKay of The Big Short, Vice, and of course, Don't Look Up, named his production company Hyperobject Industries and uses the concept in all his work, whether we recognize it for that or not. Things are getting weird, so this is the time to embrace the uncanny, making connections others may not see. While hyperobjects might appear to decenter humanity from the story's existential bigness, in return, they force us into relationship building and connection to find our place in time and space. And in connection comes hope. There's another concept that Morton has called hyposubjects. Not going to talk about it because it's actually about characters, and it makes me lead right into the hero's journey. So we're just going to skip that right now. Let me say, someone recently asked me to name the quintessential new mythos work. And for me right now, it's Everything Everywhere All at Once. But no author has to write in the new mythos. You write what you want to write. Some works are utopian but old myths. Some works break down the myths but are dystopic downers. However, many authors in the last 50 years have been building to a new mythos, playing with different shovels and pails in the same sandbox. So let's list some. Beyond who I've already mentioned, Star Trek. Ursula Le Guin, Ian Banks, everyone who's ever worked at ASU CSI's group, Kim Stanley Robinson, Cory Doctorow, Kat Rambo, Nissi Shaw, David Brin, Brenda Cooper, Octavia Butler, Ada Palmer, Becky Chambers, Emily St. John Mandel, N.K. Jemisin, Annalee Newitz, Susan K. Quinn, Rachel Campbell, and so many more. Let's also not forget all the punk movements. I do an entire chapter in my book on punk. Cyberpunk, post-cyberpunk, hope, solar, bio, and the rest. Storytellers in punk modes are turning story expectations on their heads by defying authority and also shifting how we see story, not just the kinds of stories they tell. It's a very new mythos approach. I've been talking about hope. I've been dropping the word hope in every so often, and not just in hope punk. Hope is throughout the new mythos in all the new possibilities. It's about a group working together. It's about recognizing the scale of the problem or the differences of opinion and how to handle it. It's in choice, in diversity and inclusion. It's about our ability as writers and audiences to see a bigger picture than in centuries past. A story doesn't have to be hope punk to be hopeful. We're here for one another. And to quote one of my favorite dudes, we can only hear what we can hear and do what we can do. Please remember that this is the beginning of the new mythos and our exploration into it. We're in the midst of a major transformation in society. It's going to take time. It took time to get here, and it's going to keep taking time to see it through. And once again, changes in the world come with adaptation in storytelling. And if we aren't telling the new stories, who will? And hopefully our new myths will inspire a future to come. So if you would like to find me, I'm going to put contact information here. I'm going to also put, so I run a new mythos group on Facebook. It's a private group. You can't find it by searching for it. It's private because we're about 400 creators, creatives in every way, academics, and policy wonks. I've got guys from RAND who are amazing, who are all focused on understanding that this is our next step. And story applies not just to science fiction, but to every way we communicate. If you'd like to join, find me on Facebook, and I can friend me, hold on a second, and then DM me and remind me that I met you here, because I'm terrible with names. And I'll send you an invitation. And I'm going to put my contact information here. And that's a first step into the new mythos. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I just put in chat, I would love to join the new mythos. So.
You got it. It's a fun group. We're all types. And one of the reasons I've kept it private is it's really a safe place to have real conversations. I don't want people bombing in, and this is about very deep issues that can be very confrontive for people, because it's dealing with fundamental values of how you see yourself, how you see your relationships, how you see your community, how you see what you define as your people, and how you also see yourself in relation to the cosmos. Like, this is the big stuff, and this is the stuff that changes each time we go through these massive technological paradigm shifts. And it's, you have to be willing and open to have these conversations, and understand that not everybody thinks the same way you do. Because that's also part of the new mythos is, we want to tell stories that reach the maximum number of people. And if you're narrow casting, you're only going to reach the people who already agree with you.
So true. I guess at this point, we probably will want to get the input from the others. What I'm going to do is put the entire movie link to Dark Matter in, because that has an interesting backstory, that it was suppressed and it was only shown in like 2 theaters. So Meryl Streep really kind of lost out on that one, but it's all the things you're talking about are in this film.
I'd love to
And
see it.
it's, to my mind, and I know this, I shouldn't say it's not better or worse, it's different than everything all at once, but I think it does a higher cognitive level of the same, that kind of thing that's going on there without actually, well, you just have to see it. And you have to almost be in both worlds, the Chinese cosmology and ours, even to get it. I've watched it 6 times now, so
I'd love to see it.
yeah, okay, so anyway, but that's my input. There's the link to it for especially for Hua Li. You could just watch it on YouTube for free. It's called Dark Matter. And what do we have here? What do we have for the Invisible Man? Do you have any?
Yes, please ask questions. I'm here for the questions.
Usually Bob pops right in with something. I'm surprised, but I'm familiar with, I'll just fill the dead airspace. I'm familiar with Foucault, and what was his Archaeology of Madness, or that one book where he said how insanity was actually invented. I mean, homosexuality was actually invented in the Enlightenment. Before that, we had the Ship of Fools and various other ways of tolerating divergence, but then suddenly they were put into a prison with a
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, right.
yeah, and so homosexuality at that point, which we normally think of as progress, became a disease and a crime, where before it was kind of weird, eccentric. Well, maybe we'll put you on this little boat that goes between towns. We don't quite know what to do with you. But they were actually more, and it stunned me. I'd never heard all this, that they were more inclusive or tolerant, actually, before reason took over, and I need to do this. And the Enlightenment.
Well, don't also interesting. One of the things about these periods, like the Enlightenment or the Axial Age, is that they are very much about polarities. That's why we're in polarity right now. These are periods where people are being confronted so hard, so fast with change that there isn't time for the society to catch up. So people dig in. And instead of having more of a middle where everything is more tolerant, you have more intolerance. And often systems get created in these times where there is greater intolerance because of the fear of change.
Sorry. I hate to interject, but there is a whole stream of science fiction about the non-Aristotelian, the world of null A and semantics that come out of A.E. Van Vogt. That was the early Cold War and during World War II period, which was total, how do we handle this? And so I think they're making a mistake thinking that our fast thing is just starting with the internet or something.
No, it's the whole 20th century, actually.
Yeah.
It's starting with the 20th century. The other thing that I didn't talk about is this whole notion of existential risk. We really, for the first time in humanity in the 20th century, confronted existential risk. We didn't know what that meant at a special level. And that changed everything because we were looking at mutually assured destruction. We were looking at actually understanding what's going on in other places around the world. We didn't, know until mass communications. We would hear things, and a visitor from far away would tell us what their interpretation of it was. But, and you'd read books about the subject. But that wasn't, who's reading those books? That wasn't something in the mass consciousness. We actually now have a mass consciousness, and that is part of what the noosphere is. And that mass consciousness started. I mean, when Teilhard de Chardin was talking about this, he was looking at it from radio and movies. We didn't even have television when he started talking about this in the 1920s. He just saw that telegram, which was relatively instant communication, radio, and filmed experience, whether it was entertainment or newsreel, was the beginning of a passage of information, especially in real time, that had never existed before in human history. And as a paleontologist, he was fascinated by this. As a priest, he extrapolated a lot of this stuff out into more spiritual realms, and you can look up the Omega Point and all of that. Yes.
Well, so is Joseph Goebbels. I mean, he recognized in the early 30s that these things were going to be the molders of attitudes in people. So
It was
yeah.
before Goebbels. It was actually Edward Bernays, who was
Oh, Edward Bernays, yeah.
who was the father of public relations and the son-in-law of Freud.
Mm-hmm. Related some way.
Yeah. And so, and that's where Goebbels learned everything. But so there were a lot of people, but where Teilhard de Chardin took it was he started extrapolating, and he's like, well, if we can do this, we can do that. And he died in the 1950s, I want to say, and by that point, television had already taken hold, and he was saying, we're going to create something where in our own homes we have instantaneous communication. I can see you, I can talk to you. Like, he was already talking about what we're doing right now, and he was talking about the instant transmission of communication and how that was going to become like nodes in a brain. We're all a node in a giant global brain. And you know, we've been playing with this in science fiction for a long time. None of this is new in the story. And you also have to remember when we talk about how mythos are created, it takes centuries. Even though things are happening faster now because of just the nature of accelerated change, you know, it took a millennia for the axial age to take hold. It took 300 years for the Enlightenment to take hold. We're in a century now of the beginning of this, right in the guts of it. And artificial intelligence, the potential for it, not what we're calling generative AI right now, which drives me nuts. I don't even want to start my spiel.
Well, my husband likes your spiel because he goes on every day about it, that what we call it is not AI, it's automation, and it's totally a buzz term, as the semantics people would say. It's a buzzword.
Yeah, Bob's right. But having said that, how we treat things sometimes becomes its use. And my biggest fear is that we're offloading. Humans are always looking for convenience. We're always looking for a tool to make our lives easier. The problem is you always trade something for convenience, always. And in our case, we're going to be trading our ability to synthesize knowledge, you know, this is my big bugbear. If Bob's listening, I hope Bob's listening, because okay. So, you know, when you know you're good at certain things, I'm really good at synthesis. Like, I can work in a ton of different fields. And, you know, I wrote, one of the things I didn't tell you is I've written academic papers on the neuroscience of empathy and how that was going to be used in communications. And, you know, like the paper I wrote in 2008 is still being quoted left, right, and center. You know, this is the stuff that I love. I love to synthesize my ideas from every kind of interdisciplinary way. And it's just how my brain works.
Could you put
That's the opposite of LLMs.
Before we go beyond it, though, could you put a link or some way to access that paper?
You got it. Okay, so actually there are two papers. The more important paper is actually the second paper for you guys. So the first, okay, oh, hello. So the first paper was a really early musing about how mirror neurons and empathy and storytelling worked, and how looking forward to future technologies like virtual reality, future communications technologies specifically. And then the paper that you guys might find more interesting is called Yucky Gets Yummy. And it's about how things that we perceived as, give me a second. Where is it? Let's see if I can get you a good copy. Full text. Oh, actually, this will, oh no, hold on. Is this in? Okay, yes. Don't be dissuaded by the Spanish. It was actually published in Europe. So in a Spanish language called journal called Tecnocultura.
Mm-hmm.
The second paper is about how speculative fiction creates society, in that through speculative fiction, and I'm talking all the way back to our founding myths,
Mm-hmm.
to the present, how using speculative fiction we have evolved the other from feared or pitied villain to cultural hero, and how using speculative fiction we've expanded what it means to be the protagonist of a story. And also, because we're talking about not just human protagonists, but monsters, aliens, creatures, non-organic things, we've expanded what it means to be human. And that this goes apace with how the novel in human history has actually liberalized human thought, because we've been able to inhabit other people in an act of empathy and expand our notion of what is proper behavior, what is acceptable, and even just our notions of what being in a culture is like. And this is all crucial stuff to the new mythos. And in the book, I do very quick rundowns. But that's how I evolved in my thought. So I started with how the neuroscience of empathy and how storytelling was key to that. Then I went into Yucky Gets Yummy. So basically the yuck factor, Arthur Caplan, bioethicist Arthur Caplan's concept of anything we're not familiar with is inherently yucky. And he didn't believe that, by the way. He was just saying it's a problem, but that's how we think. And then Leon Kass, who was a bioethicist, was like, yes, I agree. Everything we don't know or like is yucky. And he was trying to stop IVF and, all that stuff. So that got me thinking about how speculative fiction has actually been the engine. And there are real marking points in the history of speculative fiction, like Frankenstein or The Wizard of Oz or Superman, that have so radically changed the game. Go for it.
RUR.
RUR, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And Metropolis and all of these stories, but these have so radically changed the game of what we think of as protagonists and who we think of in relation to ourselves. That they've fundamentally changed society in radical ways. And which is fantastic, because we've, it's been an expansion of who we are, not a diminishment of who we are.
Oh, I have another question, and this relates back to the coming talk that I hope both you and Hua Li will have on this film Dark Matter. I want to invite both of you back, because you haven't seen it yet, but when you've seen it, you're going to know what I'm talking about. It's all about island universes and the fact that we are blossoming out. You see, if you go over to that other island universe of China, and that's what we do in the film Dark Matter. It's the things that are allowed to 100 flowers bloom or whatever, in one mental universe, and there's not much resistance to it. Could be a whole different. So it's not like we're all in step here. And then there's other ways in which they're way beyond us in that other universe, and that's so mind-boggling that I think that film had to be suppressed. I really do. I don't think it was anything official. They blamed it on that it was based on a murder, but And, because there have been a number of shooters and it was kind of, I don't know if we want to do this, although the violence was not a big part of it. But we're not all in the same trajectory of the noosphere, because there's a lot going on that you'd have, and that's just a taste of it, a very baby taste. My sister-in-law is Chinese, by the way, and I keep trying to get them to watch it. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Qingmei. Yeah, I mean, well, it's going to take a whole other, but I would like both of you. I would not just like Hua Li because she can give that, but you have this other insight, PJ, into our island universe. It's amazing. And now that the noosphere, I believe in it, but there's still these island universes that haven't quite, it's amazing.
Well, like anything else, you're talking about, I mean, if we're going to use the metaphor of the nodes of a brain for the noosphere, our own brains are not consistent.
Right.
We can hold many conflicting opinions at the same time. and likewise our global brain, I mean, the irony is we want to have conflicting opinions. This is how we find a middle ground compromise. The problem right now is from a social emotional standpoint, we're in a polarity period. Another person I really recommend that people look at, just because, I'm sending all these things in a direct message. Hold on. Oh no, hold on. Oh no,
Oh, yeah,
I posted all these things and they were
I'll copy them, I'll paste them and
oh
then send
no,
it to everybody.
hold on.
No, it's okay. Wait, I can do it. I'll copy it and send it to the whole group. Hold on.
Okay.
I'll switch up to everybody and then
I didn't even notice that was just to you. Like I'm like, oh look, I'm doing two things at once.
There it is. So the first one ends at HTM, folks, on the paste in. You have to, and the second one begins with HTTPS.
No.
Yeah.
No, hold on. These are not coming in right. Give me a second.
Or I can put a space and I can paste it in again.
Yeah. It needs the space, and also all of my. Okay, give me 1 second.
There you go. Here you are.
Link. I'm also going to, so everybody, I really was sending everybody stuff on Foucault and Timothy Morton.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I really was.
I forgot about Foucault.
I got it.
Being in English grad school, he's like, bread and butter. Everybody knows about him, but we have to remember it's a group where not everybody is in cultural theory. And he was the founder, for those that are not that much into cultural theory, of the postmodern movement in this country. I think there were plenty of others, Derrida, blah, 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 all of them over in France and in Europe. But for our English department, and I suspect we were typical, it was all about Foucault, and the others were there, but they were lesser covered. And because he was on, and then there's another guy named Paul Feyerabend. Are you familiar with him?
Can you say the last name again?
Paul Feyerabend, Feyerabend, whose book Farewell to Rationality was also, for instance, he said that the Vatican was right and Galileo was wrong, and then he tells you why. And he's a history and philosophy of science person. Actually, the Vatican was blah, 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 and Galileo was. So he enrages many people in the sciences, and he is very extreme, because he would say that, and some of what you said kind of parallels what Feyerabend says. He would say, well, actually, witchcraft is as valid as scientific method. And this would upset people, as a way of understanding the phenomena in the world. And it got to the point where he was getting these big fees going to talk at Harvard and Yale. And one student reporter raised his hand and he said, Dr. Feyerabend, if that's true, why did you ride here in an airplane and not on a broomstick? And so Feyerabend, he was pretty quick on his feet. He said, well, because I do not know the aerodynamics of flying on broomsticks. But if I had the time, which I don't, I could have. And, so and the belief, and I believed in it, then I could have.
Well, look, as we all know, there are plenty of academics who love to be, as I refer to them, as grenade throwers.
Yeah, so he is. No, he was one of the. But I think at the time, this was just as Foucault was doing his number, that Feyerabend was more actually in the field of science. He was inside the tent, so to speak, and at the University of Vienna, in the history and philosophy of science. So when he did these things, he was in all the conferences with these physicists and people. They had never been challenged in that way. And so we kind of moved to where we're used to it. But I think the Trump people have taken it in a different, not positive way, where everything is up for grabs. And this is where your newest spirit has a very dark side. Everyone can have a little site on Facebook, but not everyone has 5 million followers.
True. And
You know,
it's interesting to put Foucault also and that period in perspective. So this is how I discovered you hadn't seen any of this. There's someone who I respect tremendously, and his name is Peter Turchin. And this, I grabbed a bunch of books if I had to hold them up, is one of the best books about history as a science. War and Peace and War. This is the layperson's version. And get it up there, Peter, and yeah, Turchin. Peter Turchin and a number of scientists work in historical format called cleodynamics, and literally the goddess of history in a dynamical sense. And they started taking all in the past information from the Roman Empire on about famine, disease, wars, birth booms, deaths, you name whatever historical data they could get their hands on. And they basically they started building models. And they discovered that history runs in a remarkable sine curve. Now, it can be reset, but a lot of history in a location that we self-define runs on a 50-year cycle and a 100-year cycle and a 200-year cycle. In American history right now, we've come to a convergence of a bunch of cycles, which is one of the reasons why this period is so crazy. The 50-year cycle is a cycle of political violence. From the American Revolution, every 40 to 60 years, so it's, average 50, we have fought amongst ourselves about the same reason, which is basically, who do we define as human? Who do we put in power? Who has human rights? It's always the same fight, always, because that's our original sin, is slavery and the whole notion that we decided to take humans and we decided who was human and who wasn't. So every 50 years we blow up. From the revolution, 50 years after that, it was the Jacksonian democracy, which was also the period of the beginning of a mass genocide in this country. 50 years later was the Civil War. 50 years later was Jim Crow, anti-immigrants, the creation of the anti-immigrant laws, and also the fight for women's suffrage. 50 years after that was civil rights. 50 years after that is now. So we have a drumbeat, but it's not just this country. Other countries have gone through this drumbeat too. And not surprisingly, 1968 was a time of revolution all over the world. And Foucault was writing about heterotopias at that time, where there was mass in Western thought infighting. Wasn't about fighting each other for domination of our landscapes. It was, fighting another country, the other. It was fighting inside our own nation states. And the reason we have this drumbeat every 50 years is it takes 50 years or 2 to 3 generations, 40 to 60 years, for us to forget the lessons from last time. Mm-hmm. For the new jerks to go, oh no, I don't know anything about that. And we have to replay the same nonsense all over again. And these scientists, Peter Turchin was not a historian, he was a biological statistician. And he started applying these incredible models, but not just him, lots of scientists around the world started applying these incredible models that they were building and realizing this is just how humans work. We have this drumbeat of dissolution and reunification. And yes.
Could I call on Hua Li and see if she feels that's accurate for her Chinese history and culture?
Yeah, I agree with DJ that actually every 50 years about a big change takes place, right? Yeah. Actually, also I want to go back to your talk a little bit. I really learn a lot, especially the hyper object. I never heard of it. Sorry for my ignorance. I never heard of it before, but it's very, very inspiring. Yeah, very inspiring, and I definitely will check it out.
Timothy Morton is at Rice University, so if you want to track them down.
Yeah, right. I found it will be probably for me a very useful concept to use for reading science fiction, and also for heterotopia. Actually, Chinese sci-fi researchers also started to explore the heterotopia in Chinese science fiction. Especially, I would like to actually to introduce a Chinese writer, Han Song. His hospital trilogy. The first one, Hospital, entitled Hospital. I can put it in the box. Hospital just came out, the English version just came out, translated by Michael Berry. I think he's a professor, Chinese professor of Chinese in UCLA. And the other two novels in this trilogy is Exorcism and Phantom. They're also probably coming out in the next 2 years. But this Hospital trilogy is a very typical heterotopical topian. Yeah, topian. Yeah.
Could you put them in the chat?
Yeah.
Because
right.
people probably won't be able to read.
The other interesting thing, which I think you'd find really super helpful, especially with Chinese science fiction, is Morton's concept of the other concept I glossed over that's called hypo subjects. I'll take
okay. Yeah. I noticed that, but you didn't have time to.
Right. So quickly, hypo subjects is basically the people in a story or real life situation where, I'm just gonna give me a second. This is the easiest way to do it is just to okay, here we go. So this is a quote from Wired Magazine's writer about it. As far as I can tell, it refers to the opposite of the sort of humans who have ushered in the age of hyper objects. Rather than domineering bullies who get high on their own supply of dominion, or greedy vampires who suck the world dry for personal gain, they're outsiders who live in the cracks and often stealthily dismantle the systems that are killing us. Morton and Boyer wrote, because he also, Morton also wrote this with Dominic Boyer. They play, they care, they adapt, they hurt, they laugh. And hyposubjects basically reject the myopic, comforting myth that any one person is over here while everyone and everything else is over there. Meaning, we need characters and stories where we're all in this together. And I certainly think that applies to both Chinese science fiction and Western science fiction. And we're seeing, this massive move of seeing group dynamics in a group protagonist almost is, I guess, the best way to put it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely.
Yes, Tim.
Both of them.
Well, really, thank you for this most fascinating and dense presentation.
I'm sorry about that.
I mean, it was dense. I mean,
I know.
And trying just to grasp one concept and then you hit us with another
Yeah,
very deep
sorry.
one.
I know. It just, when I was like, oh, okay.
We need to
No,
have
it
maybe
was good.
a couple repeats of, or on some other top, this could be good. It could be a couple times come here and talk about this.
I will definitely have to re-listen to the presentation. There's no
Right.
question about it. But I have a question, maybe comment, I don't know. One of your main thoughts or trying to impart to us is that there should be hope in this whole. And I'm more of a pessimist, looking at the advantages, at the flow of this technology and this new stories, this mass communication and the post-internet, and now we're going to the transhumanistic. Where can you get this hope from? Number one. And number two, as human beings, we're still biological systems. And, you can stretch us, as far as you can, but then something snaps. And I don't know if we are getting there. I mean, and I know there are people who say, oh, we're going to extend and we're going to make a synthesis between humans and machines, and we can still overcome this I don't know, bottleneck of something. I don't know. Where something is not going right. And I don't know. Will there be hope for, okay, humanity? Okay, well, yes, we've changed, but we really haven't changed since Plato or the Sumerians or the Egyptians. We really did not change as much. We did manipulate nature. We did manipulate discoveries and stuff. We are heading into a completely different realm. And I don't know, what should we accept it? Should we be happy? Is it inevitable? I don't know. Tell me. I mean, I find you very interesting that you can synthesize these things, but you are maybe a little bit too hopeful. I don't know.
Well, here's where I actually think the ideas of how we're going to deal with it are going to come out of these stories. That's one of the reasons why I think it's incredibly important to be conscious of a new mythos, is that we can start to deal with the obstacles and the difficulties only through examples that we've seen, right? Or get communicated to us by, from very disparate places. I agree with you. Like, we're in the craziest time, because especially automation and artificial intelligence is going to do things in our societies that nobody actually, not only do the people who think about it admit that no one's actually sure what's going to happen, but certainly the people who don't think about it have no clue. It's going to be a complete shock. Because we're talking about change at every single level of who we are as humans. And yes, there are people, I mean, my books are actually about somebody who becomes not just part human, part machine, but all the variations, uploaded, embodied in a robot, embodied in another human being. He goes through a variety of evolutions to figure out how to get the bad guys. And every one of them comes with problems. And because it's hard to imagine yourself as who we are right now as something completely different. That's fundamental. And a lot of these stories actually deal with embodied sentient intelligences that aren't human. The reason I have hope, I think we need to provide hope so that people can start thinking constructively. If we all give up and roll on our backs, we're done. We're actually done as a species, because there are too many people who know how to do it and don't care about what happens to most of us. And I've actually traveled in those realms. I write about them. Like, these books are about what the oligarchs would do if given the opportunity. you know
Exactly.
and and because I know them, it's not because I was like making this stuff up. So um this is let me finish my thought, Gloria. This is we have to have hope. Like, we, as humans, we actually don't have a choice, because if we give up, then we are done. And I'm not ready to be done. And I would hope no one else is ready to be done, because in many ways, that's actually what the oligarchs want. They're very interesting in lowering the human population right now. Like, that's a thing. And they are very interested in repopulating it with their personal children. That's actually a thing. And this is not conspiracy theories. They talk about it all the time. And so when you're dealing with these kinds of people who actually have their hands in the technologies that we're going to accept because of convenience, I think we need as many stories as possible about what are the consequences, what's going to happen when we need to fight back. It's funny. The thing that started this whole thing was that talk at NorwestCon about stories in the age of President Trump, because one of the things that we were talking about was how all of these young people, by the way, Gen Z, I love them. I love them. These are kids, many of whom actually get it. There are plenty of examples of people who don't, but these kids really do. And I'm very invested in these kids because my own kids are these kids. So they've been given all these storytelling tools about fighting Voldemort and fighting the corporation and fighting whatever, but they're not told what to do afterwards. No one has the game plan for building the world afterwards. And that's what I tried to do in Conscience. I jokingly said it's my version of the end of Tolkien's trilogy, because, he's got like 9 endings. But he's got 9 endings because there's so many stories to wrap up and see what those next steps. And then he throws in that surprise, like, oh my God, there's a fight in the Shire. And, he's showing you that this is a thing that will continue, and that there is no just, we vanquished the bad guy and out, which is old fashioned story structure. Denouement, we're done. So this is why I have hope, because we actually have an entire generation of young people who are like, okay, do you know that like the people who actually have internet addiction are mostly Gen X and millennials. It's not Gen Z. We think it's Gen Z because it's a good story in our head, but it's not. They're the ones who are turning off social media left, right, and center because they're like, this is evil. So they're getting it in ways that, ironically, our older generations just aren't. There's my hope.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
You're muted.
Can I speak?
Yeah.
Anyway, H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine, and that was about, we didn't cover as much in your cycles and everything, perhaps as we should, of the development of factories and industrialization, because that was a biggie. And the whole Time Machine was about the Eloi and the Morlocks. And when Teddy Roosevelt read it, he realized that Wells was the dystopian guy in a way. I think it was the only way that Wells could be hopeful, because he saw no hope in the social system of England as it was set up. And as we're going back to now, that there is no hope for the sacrificial poor. Their lives don't matter, black, white, or purple. So, and he came from that. And so his only hope was showing that even Earth is going to go, and so is our sun. So that puts it in perspective. All you oligarchs at the top, you're going to go. Everybody's going. So that, in a way, was hope for H.G. Wells. That was the only hope he had. Most people don't know that about the time machine.
Well, and also,
the
yeah,
death of our sun, and that was actually because he couldn't deal with this unending landed aristocracy killing off all the poor through factories, through Irish famines, whatever, you know.
well, and Worlds was a commentary about colonialism.
Teddy Roosevelt read it. He was a very different person, and he had a meeting in the Rose Garden with H.G. Wells. I don't know if you know about this. And Teddy said, he was not stupid, he read a lot. He said, well, Mr. Wells, I've read your novel. It's very depressing, and it may well be true that we're going to go and our son is going to die, and that's your hope, because then there'll be a leveling. We won't have these terrible slaveries and the few, preying on the many. But he said, because being Teddy Roosevelt, he said, even if that may be true, we have to act and struggle always as if that isn't going to happen. And I thought that really fits what you're saying, and that came from Teddy Roosevelt of all people.
Like Teddy, I'm a huge Teddy fan, except for some of his stuff.
Except for the big.
Some of his stuff, I'm thinking he's awesome. Some of his stuff, not so much. But he was somebody who really did like put his money where his mouth was, and quite literally, in fact. But the other thing about H.G. Wells is so interesting is like War of the Worlds was actually his angry commentary at the colonialization of Australia,
right,
and the killing of the Tasmanian Aborigines. And I lived in New Zealand for 7 years. I'm a New Zealand citizen. That's why I have a high tiki around my neck. And when you study what happened in other cultures with colonialism, I mean, the U.S. is terrible. But then you realize it wasn't different elsewhere, wherever the British Empire went. Actually, New Zealand was the least affected. They had wars. And it was the only place in all of colonial history that the indigenous people were given citizenship and rights, because the British realized we can't beat these people. They are too fierce. They are too smart at warfare. We're never going to be able to do this. So let's just give them rights, and then we'll abuse them, which they did. Mm-hmm. But so H.G. Wells was here saying, if the English only knew what it would be like to be an indigenous person, and maybe I can reflect that with the aliens coming. And I think, the Deus Ex Machina is how he dealt with it, which is bacteria ultimately killed the aliens. It wasn't us.
And the story that we're dramatizing is called The Crystal Egg, which was written about a year before War of the Worlds. And it's more ambiguous, where a man gets hold of a crystal egg, and then we tell the story that, there are these people, they sort of calibrate that due to what's in the sky that you can see through the egg, that they're on Mars. But it's a mixed bag, and it's like, if we do this, maybe it'll go this way. And you're left with hope in that story, that it depends on what happens next and next and next. It isn't all done. And then he went in and wrote the other one, and they're sort of related. I have one other thing I'm going to put into the chat, and it's about Franco Moretti's Distant Reading. And I got this as a holiday gift. It's in the field of literature, computer-assisted literary analysis. I've been an early adopter, and I published using that in various extrapolation, the MLA journal. But this distant reading is Franco, I'll just put it, it's better than I could say it. What he did is he used huge corpora of novels from about the 1780s, where Gothics were coming in. And what he's tracing is the cycles that you can get from huge corpora of the tropes that were used in Gothics, and they fade, and they come in and they fade. And he said it was in like 50 to 70 year cycles, a genre. So this may be, in our field of rhetoric, it reflects what we call in rhetoric the rhetorical situation. That changes. So early, for instance, early opening of China was a quite different rhetorical situation. We were bringing Chinese international students in to work for slave wages like you can't believe in the 90s. We loved our Beijing students. We were the professors in America. We'll pay them $2 an hour, and boy, they'll work 24 hours a day. But that was a much different situation, and that is reflected in that film Dark Matter. So you're in one historical epic or rhetorical situation, and now we're in a quite different rhetorical situation. So this 50 to 70 year cycle that he didn't know it in advance. He just put in, words and what came up the most. And he saw that, oh, that shows those particular words, ghost, castle, they come in and they're more and more, and then they fade out. And Harold Bloom, I forget if he was at Harvard or Yale. He is like the top dog, of the literary critics. He hated it and he ranted. He said, this man is, ruining our field. And I read paper.
Hilarious.
That's what, it's interesting that even in literature, you get a cycling like that.
It makes sense. Literature, like any art form, is just a reflection of who we are as a people. And also artists tend to be the people waving the flags going, hey guys, you better look at this. Look at this. There's an issue over here. In whatever way that is, and their in whatever modality they work in. Because that's what we do. We're filtering society, and it's coming out whether we're conscious of it or not. I mean, most artists are.
And one other word about Dark Matter, I keep going back to it. The man who was the director was in the Beijing Opera. He is a director who had training in the Beijing Opera. So The Monkey King is the play within the cave. I'm sure you've heard of The Monkey King. Quali, from Journey to the West is the name of the title. I mean, the title of the text that Monkey King came out of. So, that was a period of what we call a contact zone. We're not, oh, bye-bye, Tim. We're not there anymore. Now we've gotten a little more familiar, but that shows that very fragile period. And how did we use those students? How did we behave when they were first coming from China? It's just an amazing thing. And of course, it was suppressed. It made $75,000, that film, with Meryl Streep. So I hope we can do it. I hope I don't get now on a binge and I'll have to watch it 3 more times, but it is incredible. And it's what you're saying, PJ, what you do when you watch it the first time. It will take many people, they won't watch it that many times, but you'll get so many layers. It's like James Joyce.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
One of these idiots on Rotten Tomatoes said, well, I don't get it, that Dark Matter, it's all these inscrutable Oriental characters. And they gave it a 4 out of 10,
But I don't know what problems you have. I mean, if you want to portray certain situations, we're coming down where people are coming out and saying, if a book has anything that upsets somebody, we don't want our children reading it. And this drives me absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you get around this kind of attitude that you shouldn't learn what happened and shouldn't have to evaluate what happened, and you shouldn't come to terms with what happened. And
don't you think it's the retro people who aren't able to do anything about all the electronic communications? It's their one feeble stab at getting paper books out of real brick and mortar libraries or real school rooms. They're the people who are technologically
and sometimes it's even people who are technologically advanced who are out there.
Well, they're leading the charge. They're doing it for political and
they're leading against people who don't agree with them.
Yeah. And so they're
The whole
just the
problem
opportunists, but the
on
ones who
both
get
sides.
emotional, they're the poor people.
But you also
But
have to remember, all of this is about fear.
Yeah.
All of this is about fear of change. There are a certain percentage of people in every culture, not just American culture, in every culture who are pretty staunchly authoritarian in their belief systems and their stance. About 25 to 30% in every human culture, just how we're all wired.
Mhm.
And that 25 or 30% in some cultures can become the tail that wags the dog because
Yeah.
of how intolerance works in cultures. And you can read Karl Popper, you can read Nassim Taleb, who all talk about the power of a small intolerant minority. And if not checked, I mean, some of it is very it's benign, but some of it is not. And
Well, I'm getting a feeling. Sometimes I'm glad I'm not young anymore, as they say, because I thought we went through this at an earlier
this is
period.
it, right? This is
I thought
it.
we sort of went through this.
Every
and
senior
thought
that
we-
I know says that.
yeah.
But
And
if you
it's
look
like,
at the big scale of history, it's always two steps forwards, one step back. Always. The pendulum swings back and forth, but it always swings a little bit less. And it's,
let's be convinced.
and it is our job, getting back to what Tim was saying, it is literally our job as human beings to stem that impulse of moving backwards, of being retrograde, of reactionary, of now, having said that, we also have to look at the stuff that's coming forward and recognize that there are things that we can't accept or we have to discuss. Like, this is something I talk about a lot with groups who say, what do you want to leave us with? and, and the thing I try to leave people with, no matter what topic I'm talking about, is that we all have a voice. We all have a say. And the irony is that normal people just said how they felt. We can work with that. Everyone can work with that. That's how change actually happens. If we're looking at the onslaught of AI and robotics, we have a voice. I mean, I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America.
Mhm.
We're out there striking right now. And the entire every Hollywood guild is following us for the first time in history. Normally when we strike, they all go, oh, the writers. Who are both smart enough and dumb enough to do it.
Yeah, the people see the
they take
implications.
advantage of every contract we win. Like, that's literally how Hollywood has worked for a century. This strike, we've got everybody out striking with us. So that's unprecedented because every single person realizes where this is going in the creative fields.
Right.
It's creative. It's all sorts of fields.
All sorts of fields, but I'm saying these are creatives looking at their own creative fields and their own livelihoods, and they are realizing that it's going away. The thing that made me who I am, like, I had a moment. There are lots of moments. We all have lots of moments, but a moment that made me a futurist for the first time. I was 16 years old, and I went to visit friends of my parents, who were Marcia and George Lucas. And my parents were not in the film industry. It didn't come through that way, but they were friends in the art world. And I went on a tour with my family to what is now Industrial Light and Magic. Back then it was called Sprocket Systems. About 81. And George takes us into a demo room, and there's a guy behind a very old, whatever the state of the art in 1980 was. And he hits play, and I watch them building the CGI for the Genesis planet for Star Trek Wrath of Khan. And you're watching the early CGI of the planet's creation from a cold rock to a verdant planet. And I'm so stunned. And again, I'm a child of science fiction. I turn to George and I'm like, this changes everything. And he's like, yes, you get it. He goes, now let me tell you what I'm going to do to actors someday. We're talking 1980. Now, George always thought actors were cattle, like he and Alfred Hitchcock, who got in the way of his pure vision. Don't get me started. I respect what he did, but he was wrong. So this has been in my mind since 1980 that we were going to chip away at every part of making a motion picture, every creative department, and eventually turn it into a computer program, including acting. And so I've been thinking about this a long time. And that's actually what finally woke everybody up in Hollywood, is that the Teamsters realize if you don't build a set or go on a location, you don't need a truck. It's like the plasters and the woodworkers realize if you don't build a set, it's all generated by CGI, they don't have jobs. Every single, all of Yahtzee realizes they're out of work. These are hundreds of thousands of people in a town, which it's one of its biggest industries. So what happens? I mean, there are only so many people you need to build a background via CGI. And so this is what we're talking about and why the writers are at the front of this, as they always are. And this is a tiny industry in a gigantic planet, but it represents an awful lot.
Well, and you look at big industries, one of our largest employer are truck drivers. And you can see the end of those jobs coming. Once they get the automation of trucks mastered. And you can't even object to it because they're going to be so much safer for the rest of us on the road. And let's face it, when you get old and your vision gets bad, you sort of wish you had a car that could drive itself and know where it was going and be safe. So it gets scary as you look at the benefits and what you gain. But it's happening in all sorts of things at all levels. And I know I worked with computers, and I remember trying to put something together, and they told me this was AI. This was back in the 70s. And I said, I don't think I want to do this. What do you mean? Well, you're asking me to put everything I know into writing the responses to this program so it can sort of figure out stuff. And that's not something I want to do. I like my job and having to do this, so I didn't do that. But there were people trying to tinker around with it way before it was a thing and reacting to it. And it was scary even then, that you could see they wanted to pull it out of your brain and automate it. Because I was very good at programming and stuff, and they wanted to take the people that were good at that and try to automate it. But you really can't. And to some extent, there is something to being human. It's not automatable.
Well, and also, what are we going to do? UBI is a great idea that, but what happens? What happens when, and I'm not saying people have to work, like, I don't believe that people have to work to make money to feed the, pardon me, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh gosh. Anyway, there are many kinds of economies. However, people need to feel needed. They need to be in communities. They need each other, and they need to feel like they have a purpose. Now, yes, will it allow a lot of people to enjoy their creative purpose? Sure. But not everybody is driven by that. No, there's an essence of compulsion in creativity. And so what are people going to do? It's going to be interesting. Like, this is so massive. I can imagine many scenarios. Like I'm a futurist. This is what I do. I can imagine countless scenarios, and they range from the worst case to the best case, and everything in between. But I'm curious what's going to happen and where, because it's not going to be the same everywhere. Culture is really going to affect it. Our value systems are really going to affect it. So I didn't, at this point, I can play around with all the ideas I want in my head, but I couldn't tell anybody where exactly what's going to happen, and nor should actually any futurist.
Well, I hope you're optimistic. I can see good coming of it, as long as we don't let a few rule the many.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things we can do with our time that we don't have to do things computers can do.
Well, that's what the oligarchs want, the few ruling the many, so don't do that.
Here in Arizona, we're already there. In Arizona, we're already there. The politics of Arizona is already where you're talking about for future, we're there. It is so bad. I mean, we have a school of management and nothing for workers. It has always been this way, but now because they've got the global communications. So I challenged it this month because there was a big documentary put out at KCET about the Memorial Day massacre of 10 unarmed steel workers at Republic Steel in 1937. They did not play it anywhere in Arizona. And they played it, no, none of the PBS would hear, no. So, I'm following everything you're saying. And I was so upset because my family worked as steel workers. My dad did. When we were right next door, 3 of the dead were from East Chicago. And Lupe Gallardo Marshall was from Hull House. And she is a big featured player in this documentary. So I had direct reasons to wish it. And I went to the annual community advisory board, and he said, oh yeah, I'll talk to her, the program. And he's Black, the man who runs the station. So you could be in the system all the way up.
Oh, and if you read
this, it's very upsetting. And so one thing that I did was I got the library. It turns out there's a companion book. The only thing I could do, it's like they put a curse on Snow White, but the fairy godmother comes and says, I can't undo that, but I'll do this, a little bit help. So I got the book ordered and they got it at the library. But we're in a whole situation where what you can do in California, it's a whole different world than Arizona. I think people should know that. They should know. It is really crazy. The whole 40 years I've lived here.
Last week they published the statistics on the COVID. Arizona has the worst record of any state in the union. There's a reason for that. She's talking to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you just ignored those dumb rules and stayed home and wore your mask. I mean, wanted to survive these things, but.
That's right. So, but I think that is why I'm so hypersensitive to communications and finding, because I'm kind of a fast thinker myself, and finding ways around, sometimes it's almost impossible. In a censored place like Arizona. I mean, we don't have to go to other countries. We've got it. And I don't mean ignorant people going to libraries because they don't like a word in Huck Finn. I mean, the whole PBS stations here. And that should scare everybody. I mean, the other thing about PBS right now, you can extrapolate to the future, is that it changed, and you can look that up around 1990. When Tucker Carlson's father was the head of it. And it has become more and more decentralized, which could be considered good, but that means things like this can happen. Something as big as your market, KCET and Southern Cal PBS, it can be, it has the word worker. That means 90% of the country might not pick it up. Whereas we're doing well on race. We're doing very well. In fact, the head of our station is a Black man. He's the chief operating officer of KUAT. And he said he'd look into, I'm not doubting him, but he might pick it up. He might not be able to. Sometimes you have to pick your what is it? Pick your battles,
Battles,
yeah. So,
Which is a
so this
shame.
is scary to me, living in this constantly. And you know what that does? That means you have no history. We can represent all working class people as Nazis, and there's no way to counter that because you have no history, because we are controlling your representation. And if it benefits the people who are more well off, then they don't take the heat for racism. You did it, you workers.
You just try to get people to go out and vote. That's the most I try to do, because that's the salvation that we have is
That's right. And we're
we
all
still
doing
have to
that.
vote. So let's
Yeah,
try to
yeah,
get
we're
people
all-
to go out.
Yes,
The only
yes,
thing
yes.
that's galvanizing people, to be quite honest, at the moment is the abortion issue.
Yeah.
It's getting a lot of people active that weren't before.
Well,
But-
these are the unfortunately on both sides in semantics, these are the buzzwords that S.I. Hayakawa talked about. And unfortunately, they skip over the whole prefrontal and cognitive area. They come right out of the reptilian brain. And he said, language is like that. Words, there are Hayakawa, there are words that and they energize our whole bodies, and they're called buzzwords. And so as we take up a position, I think we should always be aware that even on the good side, we're dealing with buzzwords, and to try to think of what Hayakawa said is the many positions that gradations that science inductively can take. It doesn't immediately go to totally bad, totally good.
That's one reason you like science fiction. It puts things in a sort of different perspective, so you can think about them without hitting those particular buzzwords.
Exactly
his
right.
book
The,
was-
the other the other thing to remember is George Lakoff. Don't ever repeat their buzzwords. Don't repeat them.
Mhm.
So don't say the negative of the thing that they're saying is a positive. You know, they're weapons of mass destruction.
Mhm.
No, they're not weapons of mass destruction. Don't say weapons of mass destruction, that there are or aren't, because the not, the no, the negation is not heard by the brain.
That's right.
We literally don't take it in. All we hear are there are weapons of mass destruction. and
Yeah.
and this is what the political right are geniuses at. They're actually they know exactly what they're doing.
They are
And the left has never figured out. They decide, oh no, we're going to engage them where they live. No, don't.
No.
That is the worst thing.
Never win the war of words.
You
They
never
always
win the war words that way.
the
It's all-
worst.
It's all in the
Defund the police.
physical-
I mean, I never heard of
the
it done.
physical way that words work on us. I got an op-ed in the Star on Easter about buzzwords, that they're bad for our brains. And I went into all that, and they picked it up on one day's notice because nobody ever, the people in the field of English are really dropping the ball. We should be doing periodic columns all the time about these issues. But when, I don't want to say too blanket a condemnation, but we're not doing enough to get out there outside of our trade journals and technical journals. We need to be in the paper. We need to say this about buzzwords because they haven't heard it. Many people have never heard that, and they take them as the literal thing. They have a magic connection, which is what Hayakawa talked about, between the entity and the arbitrary arrangement of phonemes that designate it. They really use a word like abortion, and it's the real thing. The minute it's said, it's magically it, and they all tense up. And it's a great book. It's called Language and Thought and Action. He goes through the two valued politics of buzzwords and how they're used, in these international wars and buildups of demonizing other countries, and how we do that.
We don't seem to be getting any better at controlling it.
Well, what I'm saying,
Hopefully we will.
We should be out there, the people in language. And I put out, you're into voting. I'm into getting those people in language to get in the newspapers. They need to be helping people to see this. People did respond. They said, wow, I never thought of it that way. It slows you down. So anyway, PJ, I hope you and Wally will actually go see that film. It's free on YouTube. Dark Matter. It is such a synthesis in itself, and it had to be suppressed And I also hope my sister-in-law will watch it again. I think she watched it as an adventure thing, you know, kind of a thriller, but it's got a lot there. And I think that it would make a good follow-up where you can bring in all these threads that you brought up, and it's like a nexus or a vortex, if that's the word I'm looking for, a vortex for all these different things. It breaks my heart. I watched it 6 times, and every time I watch it, it breaks my heart, because somehow there must be a way for our island universes to, and Meryl Streep breaks your heart with her performance. She's the one with empathy. So you get, I'm not going to tell too much, but you get his mother who works in a factory in Beijing, and they both, at one moment, you know, it's sort of like Everything Everywhere All at Once. It has one of those moments in the film, and it's incredible. But and so that gives me hope, although this ended in a murder, that doesn't always have to happen. And if we can't overcome our island universes, it does have to happen every time. And we should have never suppressed that film. I mean,
I'll definitely take a look at it.
That's really sad. Okay, so any other final wrap-up comments from you, Nancy? You've had a lot of run-ins with automation and AI. And
Oh yeah, I think you just keep doing what you think is right.
mm-hmm.
And you keep, I just don't get involved in long arguments with people anymore. That doesn't work.
No.
One is arguing is just bringing up the same points. So you want to talk about other things, and hopefully people will start getting ideas. But you just want to get along with people. So I have some friends that may share different ideas, so we just don't talk politics.
Oh, sure.
There are people with whom that has a zero payoff.
Well,
so
that's the Jane Addams.
What works and what doesn't. And the best thing is we have to keep talking.
Right. Jane Addams believes
we need
that.
to talk to each other. And I think that's the starting point for everything. Is you have to, as you said, you want to stop being so much an island, and maybe start communicating on something is better than nothing.
That's true. Yeah,
like
and you can look for the thinnest thread of common ground, and that was initially. There's people before Jane Addams, but she started to theorize that in the Pullman Palace car strike of 1894 from Hull House, she ended up getting the Nobel Peace Prize for her rhetoric, which was about looking for the good intentions on both sides originally. You can't believe it, you know, where you're starving the people or you're shooting them down, the strikers. But she said, if you step back, you know, you can see originally they each had some, yeah. So that's where you can kind of.
But that's it.
How about you, Huali? Do you have any wrap up?
No, not really. I just say I really enjoy and I really learn a lot.
I enjoyed this
I will
so
definitely
much.
watch the movie.
I knew this was going to be a really good one. So just knew it. One of our best. Okay, so PJ, you know, hang in there, and solidarity with all the Hollywood writers. If I were there, I would do something for you, but that's the best I can do. Just distance.
Oh yeah, it's you know, again, it's going to be a long haul. So in that regard, and you know, we're all just doing what we can do.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a lot on so many levels, you know, various levels, and we shall meet again, and hopefully, you know, bring back something with Huali and PJ, because I think this is a very good, you know, the movie, whether or not you use it, is a good excuse, and you'll see what a vortex it is. So that could be a spring jumping off point if you come together again at our group. All right, so take care all, and be strong, be empathic, but be strong.
Before you turn it all off, give me 1 second.
Sure.
I'm trying to copy everybody's. Come on. Ugh, I was trying to.
You can save chat. You know how to do
save,
that.
how do you save chat?
Oh, okay, everybody, if you want to save everything we have, go to the three dots at the bottom of chat where it says more next to the little smiley face.
Yep.
And up at the top, it says save chat.
No, not that one.
Is it opening up? If you're on a device.
It says save chat.
So
No.
you see at the very bottom, there's three dots.
Oh, that very bottom. Yep, got
At
it.
the very bottom of your chat window, there's three dots. And if you click on the three dots, usually what happens is a little pop-up opens and the top choice is save chat.
And where does it save it to, by the way?
Oh, it saves it to your download.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So sometimes it might be some long old code, but just look at the date because you probably don't
you got it.
anything else from today's date. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Now you can do that anytime.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, y'all.
Take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
next weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.